Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on root cause analysis and systemic corrective action. My name is Shannon Craddock. I'm the Programs and Accreditations Manager at Perry Johnson Registrars, and I'm so pleased that you can join us here today for the webinar. So today, we're going to be talking about why we're doing this, why this particular topic. We'll talk about a well-written audit finding and how it sets the problem solver up for success. We'll talk about actions taken to correct or corrections or containment actions. We'll talk about root cause analysis, figuring out why the problem happened. And we'll discuss a very specific technique for root cause analysis, the why technique. Actions taken to prevent recurrence or corrective actions, actions taken to prevent occurrence or preventive actions, and then what's involved in a sound verification exercise. So first off, why are we doing this? Why this particular topic? Well, we want your organization to improve. I'm a firm believer there should be a strong correlation between third-party audit performance and your overall quality record with your customers. And the purpose of a management systems audit isn't to convince the auditor to write as few findings as possible, accept any valid findings, and take systemic corrective action for each of those that are documented. And that's when you'll start to see the strong correlation. You're fixing the issues. They're not recurring. You're increasing the likelihood that you're delivering on time, on quality product to your customers. So let's start at the very beginning. The audit findings should have three distinct parts. And those parts are, number one, statement of nonconformity. Number two, objective evidence. And number three, a clear citation of the requirement that's not being met. Audit findings that do not contain these three parts should not be written by PGR auditors. And they shouldn't be accepted by you either. I'm here today to tell you that if a PGR auditor writes up a finding in your audit and it doesn't look this way, give it back to them and ask them to rewrite it. Please reject any audit findings that don't contain these three parts in the closing meeting. From time to time, auditors will document opportunities for improvement, but these should exist only as observation statements or recommendations. There'll be no citation of a requirement that isn't being met, because if auditors were citing a requirement that wasn't being met, it would be a nonconformity. So let's talk about some common pitfalls with the statement of nonconformity, which is the first part of a well-written nonconformity. So often the nonconformity recorded is not the problem, but a symptom of the problem. The statement of nonconformity needs to be expressed as an issue with the system. And that word is bolded for a very specific reason. If the problem is expressed in terms of a person or incident, then it's at the symptom stage, and we want to avoid that. I see both internal and third-party auditors making this mistake. So it's important to get the true problem, the systemic issue. There's that word again, system, or the problem-solving efforts will not be effective. Fixing symptoms doesn't stop the issue from recurring. Additionally, a well-written nonconformity should stand the test of time. Your organization should be able to go back and do its electronic or hard copy archives and look at nonconformities written years ago and understand exactly what the problem was. What was the failure? So let's look at some examples of poorly worded statements of nonconformity. There was no training matrix for the job for the first shift operator running job 9954, indicating competence to run that job. So this is a symptom, not the problem. We're expressing the issue in terms of a person, a very specific person. It's at the symptom stage. We're confusing objective evidence with the statement of nonconformity. A better way to do this. The system for recording employee training and competence is not completely effective. Hey, there's that word, system, right in our statement of nonconformity. That's what you want to strive to do. Supported by the objective evidence. And here's where we get into the symptoms of the problem. There was no training matrix for the first shift operator running job 9954, indicating competence to run that job. And then a citation of the applicable requirement, in this case 9001-2015, 72B. And notice that we're taking that requirement as far out as possible to help the problem solver identify the shall that isn't being met. We aren't saying section 7 or section 7.2, but very precisely 72B. So the best way to write this finding is the system for recording employee training and competence is not completely effective. We're focusing on the systemic issue and not on the specific incident. That one operator on first shift running job 9954. That's the symptom of a larger problem. All right, let's get another example. The quality auditor in the blue cell was using an uncontrolled form to record the results of first piece inspection. Again, we're at the symptom level. We're talking about a specific person or incident. We're confusing, again, objective evidence with the statement of nonconformity. A better way to do this. The document control system is not completely effective. Again, the word system appears right in that statement of nonconformity. Supported by objective evidence. Well, we saw a quality auditor in the blue cell using an uncontrolled form to record the results of first piece inspection. And a clear citation of the ISO requirement 7531A of 9001-2015. And again, we're taking that as far out as possible to the A suffix. So again, the best way to write this finding, the document control system is not completely effective. Again, we're focusing on the systemic issue and not a specific person or incident. We're leaving the symptoms out of the statement of nonconformity. Those appear in the objective evidence. So in closing, when you review a statement of nonconformity written by an internal auditor, a customer, if they're doing an audit of you, or your third-party PJR auditor, you want to ask the following questions. Have we distinguished between the symptoms of the problem and the real systemic issue? Is that final statement of nonconformity really focusing on a systemic issue? And are there sufficient data, objective evidence, and a citation of the requirement not being met to assist in understanding? PJR has an internal document issued to our auditors. It's our advisory number 3 that requires all auditors to document any non-fulfillment of a requirement as such. It's not acceptable for auditors to say, oh, you just fixed this, I won't write it up. It's inexcusable to do that. There's no benefit for you. You're just fixing the symptoms of the problem. It's going to contribute to the diminishment of your management system and really the integrity of accredited management system from a much higher perspective. So it's our expectation here at PJR that all nonconformities written by PJR auditors need to be documented as I just described. All All right, so let's move on to actions taken to correct. These are often referred to as corrections or containment actions, and they're actions taken with respect to the symptom or incident. So they're incident-specific actions. They're very important. They're a necessary step and should be taken immediately to stop the symptoms. They typically take two forms. So if a gauge is found to be in a suspect or uncalibrated state, it would be, we calibrated that gauge. Or if an uncontrolled form was found, we controlled the form. But it can also be adding a layer of inspection to catch any further occurrence. Keep in mind, however, that inspection adds cost to a management system. It's not really adding value. And later we're going to see that once a true corrective action is discovered, because we know the root cause, then costly added layers of inspection can be removed. Containment actions or corrections should be very specific. So if we consider the examples that we started following when we talked about the first part of a nonconformity, the first one would be the training matrix for the first shift operator running job 9954 was updated, and it now reflects his competency to run that job unsupervised. Or all copies of the uncontrolled form the quality auditor in the blue cell was using were destroyed. Corrections also need to include an extend analysis. Let's talk a little bit more about the concept of extend analysis. It's often referred to as a look across. So the auditor found one instance, but how many more are there? What's the depth and breadth of the problem? So if an auditor found 2 gauges out of 178 gauges that were not calibrated during their audit, you would obviously have to fix those. But you would have to confirm the status of all 176 additional gauges and see how many other issues there were, looking across all those other gauges to understand the depth and breadth of the problem. So the PGR auditor has uncovered one or more examples of a non-conforming situation. For example, a gauge that's out of calibration, a document that's not controlled, a training record isn't updated. So a properly executed and well-written extend analysis would look like this. We verified 2 gauges found by the PGR auditor, 2458 and 1354. Both were conforming. Our extend analysis included the 213 other gauges in our facility. So you're letting us know how many other gauges there were. Only one, number 5858, was found to be out of calibration. It was calibrated and returned to service. No product was measured with this gauge since it was last in a known state of calibration. This is an excellent extend analysis. They looked across every other gauge. We know there were 213 other gauges. One was found out of calibration, and they looked to see if any products were verified with that gauge since it was last in a known state of calibration. And luckily, there were none. Our current nonconformity report that's in the audit report that PGR auditors will leave with you does include a blank for extend analysis. Now, use of the PGR form is optional, but if you use your own form, you have to include an extend analysis. And I've noticed that many companies' problem-solving forms don't include a blank for this. Okay, let's move on to root cause analysis. A common pitfall is that many corrective actions reports will restate the incident for the root cause analysis. And this is not acceptable, folks. So somebody's root cause may read, our organization failed to update the training matrix for the operator running job 9954. And I think, yes, I know, I told you that. I told you the training matrix for the operator running job 9954 didn't reflect his competence. You're just telling me you didn't update it. We already know that. Why did it not happen? Or the quality auditor in the blue cell didn't use the correct form to record the results of first article inspection. Again, we know this. We told you this when we wrote you the finding. Why is that the case? Another pitfall, although not as common, is that some corrective action reports will repeat the containment for the root cause. And this is also not acceptable. Okay, so if you're looking at your Instagram or toggled to your email, I encourage you to look at the presentation again. This is the single most important slide in today's presentation. A good root cause analysis answers this question. What in the system failed such that the problem occurred? I'll repeat that. What in the system? Hey, there's that word again, system. What in the system failed such that the problem occurred? The focus is on the system and not the incident. The potential exists that a problem may have multiple root causes or several possible root causes. And if the single true root cause cannot be discovered, then all possible root causes will require corrective action. So if the root cause has been found, you should be able to turn the problem on and off, just like a light switch. And if the problem cannot be turned on and off at will, then the root cause has probably not been found. I used to work in automotive manufacturing, and we had an issue, a recurring issue with General Motors, a particular part that had left-hand and right-hand components to it. Our operators were packing the right-hand parts in the left-hand boxes and the left-hand parts in the right-hand boxes. And this occurred on all shifts way too often. We were written up at General Motors. We convened a problem-solving team. And we determined that the narrow configuration of the manufacturing cell and the fact that the pack-out boxes just couldn't physically be located in intuitive locations with respect to the operator's body. So the left-hand pack-out box wasn't on the left-hand side of the operator's body, and the right-hand pack-out box wasn't on the right-hand side of the operator's body. They were in front and back of one another. So the left-hand box was directly in front of the operator, and the right-hand box was behind that box. So we spent thousands of dollars moving 3 manufacturing presses and reconfiguring the cell layout. But guess what? The problem recurred. Not as frequently, but it was still recurring. So we knew we didn't have the true root cause because we couldn't turn the problem off, just like a light switch. We ended up reconvening our problem-solving team, and we invited a third shift material handler who wasn't previously invited to the problem-solving meeting. And he said, you know, if it was impossible to put a left-hand part in a right-hand box and vice versa, the issue wouldn't happen. So we worked with our packaging engineer, reconfigured the packaging dividers, and sure enough, we had turned the problem off, just like a light switch. And when we stopped using that new packaging material, the problem turned on again. So we knew we had the true root cause. By recreating the defect, we knew we had the true root cause. There are a lot of different techniques for root cause analysis. Is not Ishikawa or fishbone diagrams, the 5Y or the Y technique. I like to refer to it as the Y technique because sometimes you can get there in fewer than 5 Ys. All right, so let's take a look at our nonconformities that we've been following and go through the exercise of asking why over and over again in an attempt to identify the root cause. So the statement of nonconformity was, the system for recording employee training and competence is not completely effective. And the objective evidence to support this, where we identify the symptoms of the problem, no training matrix for the first shift operator running job 9954 indicating competence to run that job. So we'll begin the process of asking why over and over again. Well, why wasn't there a training matrix? Well, the first shift supervisor failed to update the training matrix as required by the first of the month. Well, why? There's that word, why did they fail to update it? Well, before the end of the previous month, the HR manager would email the training matrix template to all the department supervisors, but that didn't happen this time. Well, why didn't it happen? The HR manager left the company before the end of the month and a replacement didn't email the template to all the supervisors. Well, why didn't the new HR manager do this? Well, the procedure for training didn't include a requirement to prompt the new HR manager to email the template to all the supervisors. So in this particular case, we feel like we've identified the root cause in 4 whys. The problem-solving team thought that they identified the root cause with an issue with the procedure for training. This is a bit subjective. Potentially there may be another why, but maybe not. To increase confidence and the likelihood you've gone far enough, make sure that this why analysis isn't just being done by one person. It needs to be multiple people from multiple disciplines participating in this exercise. And that first problem solving that I discussed in the automotive company where I used to work, we didn't initially invite that third shift material handler. Make sure there are enough people in your problem solving team. Should never be just the management representative sitting at their computer 24 hours before the nonconformity responses are due. All right, let's take a look at our other example. The document control system is not completely effective. Again, the word system is right in that statement of nonconformity. Supported by the objective evidence, the quality auditor in the blue cell was using an uncontrolled form to record the results of first piece inspection. Well, why were they using this uncontrolled form? Well, controlled hard copies of the form had all been used in the blue cell, so the quality auditor resorted to an uncontrolled form. Well, why did they do that? Why didn't they just get more copies of the current version? The quality auditor in the blue cell was not aware that when no hard copies of a particular form were available, the latest version of all forms could be accessed through the company's database. Why weren't they aware of that? The quality auditor was not given a username and password to access the database. Well, why weren't they given access to the database? HR didn't have a policy to ensure all new hires, even quality auditors, are granted a system username and password. PGR will not accept the following for root cause: oversight. See oversight a lot. This is not acceptable. The inspector had oversight. We won't accept it. We misunderstood the requirement. I want to preface this by saying that in general, this is not acceptable unless it's your first time with the standard and you really didn't understand the requirement. But by Surveillance Audit 37, you understand the requirements and their intent. I forgot one of my personal favorites, another ISO 9001 blunder, or our consultant messed up, or human error. These are not acceptable. All right, let's move to corrective action. So the difference between correction and corrective action is that corrective actions should address the root cause. They therefore should answer that very important question: what in the system failed such that the problem occurred? Many organizations give containment actions or corrections instead of corrective actions. And repeating the containment or correction you gave as the corrective action is not acceptable. Not only should they address the system, but they should be irreversible. And by that, I mean they should involve a change in the system. Training in and of itself is generally not a system change. And chances are you already did some training. How is retraining going to prevent occurrence if the initial training didn't prevent occurrence in the first place? And again, incident-specific actions or corrections, containments are not irreversible either. In the automotive industry, typically corrective actions will prompt a change to the FEMA or control plan and may require a new PPAP. You should take credit for the system changes that you're making and potentially lower your RPMs. And the control plan should reflect all the controls you have in place if you've implemented a new irreversible action. There needs to be at least one corrective action for each root cause identified, and subsequent data should show the problem has 100% disappeared. You should be able to turn the problem off just like a light switch. And if you're seeing that, you're seeing the problem is 100% disappeared, you know you have the true root cause and a corrective action that is effectively addressing that root cause. So let's look at some potential corrective actions for the nonconformity scenarios that we've been following throughout this presentation. Remember our nonconformity about the system for recording employee training and competence not being effective. Our corrective action is section 4.6 of the procedure for training was updated to include a requirement for the HR manager to email the training matrix template to all supervisors before the end of the month. The HR manager was trained on this requirement, and she added a reminder to Outlook to perform this task. So this corrective action does include a training component right here, but that's not the only action we're taking. There's a permanent system change. Does this corrective action address the root cause? Let's toggle back to our root cause and see. The procedure for training did include a requirement to prompt the new HR manager to email the template to all the supervisors. And now that procedure for training has been updated to include that. There was training that went along with that and the addition of a reminder in the MS Outlook. We have a corrective action that accurately and adequately addresses the root cause. Look at our second example. The document control system isn't effective. Our corrective action reads, the new hire work instruction was revised to include a requirement to grant new hires a username and password for the database. HR personnel were trained on this change. So there is a training component, but that's not the only thing that's happening. It's supplementary to a revision to a work instruction. The question we want to ask is, does this corrective action address the root cause? Well, let's see together. HR didn't have a policy to ensure all new hires are granted a username and password. The HR work instruction has now been updated to include this requirement, and personnel were trained in the HR department. We've got a corrective action that once again accurately and adequately addresses the root cause. When training is part of the corrective action response, the response should also contain the technique that will be used to verify training effectiveness. So in many cases, people just train but never follow up on the effectiveness of the training. Perhaps an exam is administered to make sure that the concepts that we're trained on are really understood. But an exam is just one technique. Okay, let's move to preventive actions. Preventive actions answer one of two questions. What other systems exist that might have the same root cause present? Or what systems could I have had in place that would have prevented this from happening? Many corrective action reports put corrective actions for preventive actions. But keep in mind, preventive actions address the future and not the past. So what could still happen, not what did happen. Preventive actions address the system and implementing system changes to prevent future problems, not in any incidents or specific symptoms of a problem, because a problem hasn't occurred yet. Keep in mind that preventive actions are not only identified because of nonconformities. Management system standards of all types require preventive action really to be thought of as a proactive process with inputs from multiple sources. So near miss reports, 5S programs, lean initiatives, employee suggestions, and all of those should input into a preventive action system where those suggestions or inputs are considered and a decision is made whether to implement those as preventive actions or not. So somebody may suggest something, and it may be a fantastic suggestion, but it may simply be out of budget. There's no nonconformity involved if you choose not to document that and implement it as a formal preventive action. Where a PGR auditor might write a nonconformity is if you don't have a process to consider these suggestions or inputs. No nonconformity should never mean no preventive actions. Many other inputs for preventive action. And finally, we're going to close with verification activities. This is a critical and often misperformed step in the problem-solving process. And one reason for this might be is that many corrective action forms developed by clients don't have places for verification or adequate space if it exists at all. So a sound verification exercise includes the following steps. The containment actions or corrections have been taken, check. Proper root cause analysis has been performed. You turn the problem off like a light switch. Subsequent data show the problem is 100% disappeared. And when you recreate the defect, the problem returns. Irreversible systemic corrective actions have been implemented. By irreversible, I mean a system change and not just training. And if containment or corrections were of the costly added layer of inspection, those can be removed. After all, we've determined the root cause and implemented a corrective action. Problems should stop occurring, therefore we don't need to inspect for it. And opportunities for preventive action have been considered. When you're going through your verification, understand that corrective actions are meant to be irreversible, but system changes mean that how work is being performed changes, and change is difficult. Systems tend to return to where people feel comfortable. So for this reason, many corrective actions, although meant to be irreversible, are in fact reversible. So you should continue your verification activities even if you get positive results on the first verification. So data suggests that you may need to do 18 months of verification to ensure that the corrective actions are truly working. We've truly changed the system and the way work is performed, and people aren't returning to where they feel comfortable. I'd like to acknowledge that partial slide content has been provided by the IAOB. And I'll now open the floor up to any questions or comments that you may have. Please type those into the question or chat feature. I'll answer as many of those as I can in the remaining time. All participants have been muted to ensure sound quality, so you'll need to use that chat feature to type in your questions. And while we wait for those questions to come in, I'll remind you that a recording of today's presentation will be available for download from our website, www.pjr.com. Our website will also list upcoming webinars and give you a spot to access previously recorded webinars. So Oscar's asking, when will we receive a copy of the presentation? Again, you'll be able to access the recording, the presentation at our website, www.pjr.com. Juan is asking, what is the standard threshold for when a minor becomes a major? Each standard has very specific definitions for minor versus major. In general, a major is a total breakdown of a requirement, where a minor is a failure to meet a single shall. In some instances, majors increase the likelihood of shipping suspect or non-conforming product to the customer. So those are defined per standard one. Jean is asking, what ISO requirement are you referencing for preventive action not associated with nonconformities? Jean, you're right. The 2015 version of ISO 9001 doesn't reference preventive action, but there's a big emphasis on risk and identifying risk. And that is a perfect match for identifying preventive actions. Rosa is asking why oversight is not an acceptable reason for root cause. Well, Rosa, if the root cause was oversight, how are you addressing that with a corrective action? You've got to implement a corrective action that prevents occurrence. So there has to be an issue with the system that allowed the issue to occur. Pam's asking, how do we teach our team how to properly conduct this process? We have several employees with different viewpoints for the correct approach to this process. I guess by process, Pam, you mean problem solving, and taking a nonconformity and doing a formal response. I'm assuming that that's what you mean. First of all, the way you need to do it is the way that's prescribed by your customer. They may have a standardized format that you need to use, so you'll need to consult with maybe their supplier quality assurance manuals. If not, this presentation kind of walks you through the basic steps common to any problem-solving process. It would be a great model to follow. Charity is asking, could you go over what the PGR auditor may find as a nonconformity? Sure, Charity. Any ISO requirement that's not being met in the standard being audited could potentially be a nonconformity. If you have additional written documented processes, we could write nonconformities against those, and any customer specific requirements that you're expected to comply to. So Rosa appears to be asking a follow-up question about why we don't accept oversight, and the issue is management oversight. So you're saying that, I think what you're saying, Rosa, is that management is making the mistakes, as opposed to lack of management oversight over an activity or involvement in an activity, but I'm not sure. So if you could provide clarification, that would be great. Jared, we don't provide training receipts for this training. We have hundreds of participants in our webinar. You can certainly create your own training record based on your confirmation of attendance and the fact that, and a copy of the slides, perhaps. Continuous improvement is an example of preventive action, Jean, yes. Allison, I'm not really sure what you mean by human error versus human effect. Do you mean human factors cited in the aerospace standard? If you can clarify, that would be great. Pam, yes, as I stated before, this presentation will be available for download from our website, www.pjr.com, in about 24 to 48 hours. What's a good minimum number of people for a problem-solving team? This question's coming from Derek. Certainly more than one, Derek, and we see that a lot. So you want to make sure that all the disciplines that are touching the finding are involved. Why is human error not acceptable? This question's coming from Jaspreet. Jaspreet, the stance is that there is an issue with the system that allows human error to occur. So what could be implemented to prevent humans from making errors? Error proofing, hokey-okes, things of that nature. Jean brings up an excellent point. 10.2.1b says to evaluate the need for action to eliminate the cause. So there may be some instances that you do not need a corrective action. Perhaps you can prove that it truly is a one-off situation and you would just correct the problem. Those are very rare instances, Jean. Okay, so this question from, I think it's Payush. We have a transfer audit in the month of September. Do we need to have a surveillance or research audit again in December? And what will an auditor look for during a transfer audit? Payush, I can't answer that. I need to understand your entire 3-year certification history to comment on the December audit. In general, clients need one audit a calendar year. A transfer audit would be in addition to that. Transfers start with an off-site paperwork review, and an on-site audit may be required. And they're looking to make sure the integrity of the management system is maintained as you transition from one certification body to another. If you're a PJR client, feel free to email me and I can answer specific questions. Charity is asking, how can we better train a team dealing with corrective actions? Charity, I encourage you to share a copy of this webinar. There are also a lot of different webinars out on the marketplace or training. Take any of those. There's probably some that are better than this. This is free, and I think it's a great tool. It's always good to practice. You may understand the theory that I've been talking about, but take some corrective actions that you've had recently and have the team go through the exercises together. It's a great training exercise. Okay, so it looks like Rosa has typed a follow-up to her management oversight, and she means that management failed to hire adequate staff and resources to handle a particular issue. Well, I think, Rosa, that's your true root cause. There were insufficient staff or resources to handle a particular issue. The only acceptable root cause is hiring more staff, perhaps reallocating staff, reallocating their duties in order to make sure that there's adequate coverage to accomplish all tasks. I know this is especially difficult now as we're coming out of the pandemic. Again, the slides are available for download from our website, www.pjr.com. There's a section called webinars, previously recorded webinars, and that's where you can download them. Mary from Nigeria, it looks like. Welcome. I'm not sure I understand your question. Please, can this root cause and corrective actions highlighted applicable to audit observations? Okay, I think I understand now reading it out loud. So if an auditor cites an observation during the audit, that's a suggestion, almost like an opportunity for improvement. I live in Michigan, and we often refer to observations as tornado warnings. So there's no actual tornado or nonconformity, but the conditions exist that something could go wrong. But since nothing has gone wrong and there's no nonconformity, you would not need to do root cause analysis and corrective action in that scenario. If there's an opportunity for improvement on the internal audit and it's not addressed in time for the third-party audit, is that a minor finding? Great question, Angela. So the auditor should attempt to understand what is your process for considering opportunities for improvement. And they would need to look at the time that's lapsed since your internal audit. So if there was only a 2-week time period between your internal audit and third-party audit, you may not have had time to consider those suggestions yet. But failure to consider suggestions that are maybe 3 months, 6 months old, that might be a bit concerning. So you have to consider the time interval. And you should have a sound process for considering any opportunities, suggestions for action. Mary, not sure I understand your clarification about major or minor nonconformities. Casey's asking a question about how do you show effectiveness for training? Casey, I think one of the clearest ways to show effectiveness for training is to conduct an evaluation or exam after training. Maybe a simple multiple choice exam, or maybe somebody observing somebody doing the new process and documenting results. That's clear objective evidence that shows that training was effective. Just yesterday, I sat through an online training on the 50,001 standard, and I took a number of quizzes that evaluated my understanding of the training, that evaluates the effectiveness of the training. Sure, Jared, risk identified in your risk identification can certainly initiate a CAR. Opportunities for improvement can be documented in third-party audits, Ivan, in internal audits. They can also come from your employees as suggestions or customers as suggestions. Opportunities for improvement may manifest in 5S activities or other lean initiatives. Lots of different ways that they can be documented. You may have a specific form for them, you may not. They can just get documented on a piece of paper or via email. The important thing is that they're all considered through some sort of process, and you just position those and make a decision whether you're going to act on that potential as a preventive action or not. Richard's floating past the team here a scenario where suppliers do oversight as an excuse for root cause on their corrective action. They follow up by saying this oversight caused some assumptions, which caused some misunderstandings of the requirements. Would this be acceptable? Well, it sounds like the true root cause in the last Y is a misunderstanding. So that might be acceptable, Richard. Payush is asking if there's any free courses available where we can upgrade our skills. Formal training, to become a certified auditor is often not free, Payush, but PGR offers wonderful webinars that are all free on a variety of topics. that can certainly add to your auditor skill set. I'll wait a few more minutes to see if there are any additional questions, reminding you all that a copy of the webinar slides are available at www.pjr.com. Just look for an icon called webinars. I believe it's about halfway down the page on the right-hand side. You can access slides for all previously recorded webinars and also see the exciting topics that we're presenting on in the future. How do you encourage getting all departments involved in the corrective action process? This is coming from Orion, I believe. Apologize if I mispronounced your name. You really need to get people to own the management system. And if it's, I think, automatic and instinctive and the way you do business anyway, you'll get a lot of success for that. Inviting them to the meeting, making the meetings fun. But all departments should be represented that are affected by the corrective action. Quality, manufacturing, potentially purchasing or materials, sales is appropriate. Yes, certainly it's not just quality's job, Orion. Everyone involved has input or perspective that needs to be considered. Derek's asking, how do you go about verifying that your problem statement is robust? The problem statement actually has very little detail, Derek. It's going to cite that there's an issue with the system. So it's going to look very bare bones. It's actually the objective evidence that has all the meat and potatoes. And if it used the word system or process, you're already there. Hayush, I don't know who C of C is. Certificate of conformance, maybe? Please clarify. Okay, so certificates of conformity typically accompany material, some type of raw material or product that's received by an organization. And it usually accompanies the organization because the recipient organization likely won't have the capacity to test the material itself. So it's used in receiving inspection to determine if the product that's being received is conforming or not. My expectation would be the people doing receiving inspection would use that and verify it, whether it's the shipping clerk that can do that verification or if it has to be signed off by quality. Again, folks, be sure to check out our website for this presentation. We also have many exciting topics coming up on new standards, transitioning standards, as well as virtual audits and stage ones. Orion, I don't know of any course on 5 Whys for organizations to use off the top of my head. I'm sure a simple Google search will yield multiple results, some of which may be free. Folks, we have about 5 more minutes left. I'll gladly answer any questions in the remaining 5 minutes. Pam's asking if there's a resource for problem solving. Certainly this presentation, Pam, and a Google search will reveal many more. Derek's asking, when you're using a 5 why, how do you keep from veering off the issue? Derek, having multiple people involved as opposed to just one person, typically quality or the MR sitting in front of their computer, greatly increases the likelihood that you're going to stay on task. I can't emphasize that enough. You need people from all disciplines, more than one person participating in the problem-solving team. PGR gets audited many times by our accreditation bodies. Our auditors get witnessed by our accreditation bodies. We have many nonconformities that we need to solve. It's never just me doing those. It's always a team. And if we're not all in the office, we meet remotely and we're sharing screens and somebody's typing in the responses and everybody can see those. Everybody can see the why analysis as it's happening. Great question from Jared. Is it standard practice for PGR auditors to revisit previous audit finding that was successfully closed? 100%, Jared. In fact, it's an issue if they're not. So at the end of an audit, you have to submit corrective action responses to the auditor, and they're going to accept those. So they may be accepted, but in the case of minor nonconformities for some standards, aerospace and automotive excluded, for example, you may have corrective actions that are going to get implemented in the future. There's a projected timeline. When we revisit those the following year, we're going to confirm that that action was successfully implemented and that we can then close the finding. Mary Grace is asking, how do you maintain objectivity in the process? Always a challenge. Again, you want to make sure you've got a lot of people involved in that problem-solving team. So maybe one person with a bias who may be invested in the issue. Maybe it's their product line or they're the quality engineer or manufacturing engineer for that product. And they may have some biases or opinions, or they may be defensive. Including a lot of people in the problem-solving team will help maintain objectivity. Okay, folks, I thank you for your time today. We're just at about 12 o'clock Eastern time. Thank you for participating, and we look forward to seeing you on future webinars.